Welcome everyone. I'm Omar from Charitable Reuse Australia, and I'm coming to you from the lands of the Gundungurra people, who are the traditional custodians of the land. Their culture and customs have taken care of our country for over 60,000 years. I also pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging for their immense spiritual connection to land, which has never been ceded. So, welcome to this joint webinar from Charitable Reuse Australia and Green Industries SA about unlocking the insights of the South Australian Reuse Impact Study. We are so pleased to have you here. Before I pass through to Josh Wheeler, CEO of Green Industries SA, just a quick bit of housekeeping. We are in webinar mode. That means we can't see you and we can't hear you, and you can't see or hear each other, but we can feel you. And this webinar is for you, and we would love you to engage. We love your questions. There's plenty of time for Q&A. If you could please put your questions into the Q&A function, that will help us triage them. If someone's beaten you to the punch and got the question that you wanted to ask, just like it, and that'll push it up the rankings, and we'll cover them in order. And feel free to use the chat for musings, observations, or anything else you so wish. We'd love to hear who's here and how you're doing. So again, thank you so much for being here. And if I may, I'll pass through to Josh Wheeler, CEO of Green Industries, to get us started with some thoughts. Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Omar, for those introductory remarks. And I too would like to pay my respects to traditional custodians of the lands that we're all joining this webinar from today. For me and others in Adelaide, that's Kaurna people. And I acknowledge their deep spiritual attachment and relationship to country, and extend this acknowledgement to all First Nations peoples, and recognising the unique relationship to the land. And as Omar has mentioned, which we've been caring for more than 60,000 years. I'd also like to acknowledge Omar yourself, CEO of Charitable Reuse Australia, excuse me, as our project partner, as well as our research partner, RawTech, with Kat Heinrich, Lucas de Garis, and Meg Ellis joining us. I'd like to acknowledge all CRA members and representatives, state and local government colleagues, and everyone that's joining us today. I'd also like to give a shout out to the Green Industries SA team. So the team that have led this project, many involved, but to name a few, Han Tran, Serena Yang, and John Vanzo. But in particular, Han, all of the effort that you've put into this project and getting it across the line has been amazing, as well as related activities in terms of the charitable recycling subsidies program that we run, and also the organisations that participated and helped inform this study. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we're celebrating today, and really keen to get into the detail. So I've got a few slides here that I'll take you through. I'll promise to be brief, and we'll try not to have any spoilers throughout this as well. But hello, for those of you who have not met, I'm Josh Wheeler, Chief Executive of Green Industries SA, and we're the South Australian Government agency leading the state's transition to a circular economy. And this builds on our proud history in recycling and resource recovery. So we've got the principles of the circular economy in our establishing legislation, and this guides our projects and programs. Our vision is to create a sustainable future, focusing on the value of materials in a circular economy and providing the related economic, social, and environmental benefits. So this diagram on this slide demonstrates some of our core functions and the levers that we have. So leadership and advocacy is a key one in terms of developing, consulting on, and implementing policy initiatives, but also being a champion for circular economy at all levels. Incentives, assistance, guidance, and partnerships. So that's co-investing and partnering on projects, targeted incentive and subsidy programs, and providing guidance and tools to help realise the benefits of the circular economy. Innovation and technology, supporting and collaborating on projects, seeking to develop and test new systems, business models, and technologies in the circular economy. Education, behaviour change, key. I think we're touching on that a fair bit today. So through various programs and campaigns, which no doubt some of you are familiar with and will be touching on, but also sharing knowledge and capacity building, and supporting resilient and safe communities there through our lead role for disaster waste management, planning, preparedness, response, and recovery. So as mentioned, we've got the principles of the circular economy embedded in our establishing legislation, but we've also got the waste management hierarchy, and that's been in our legislation since 2003, 2004. So that's been there for quite some time and has guided our achievements over this time. And so anyone that's heard me speak, or someone from South Australia speak, will have to put up with us sort of, patting ourselves on the back every now and then about our proud history in recycling and resource recovery, and consistently leading the nation in landfill diversion. So consistently over 80%. For those here today we know that this is only one area of the circular economy, and what we're talking about today is moving up this waste management hierarchy back further around that circular economy diagram and talking about circular consumption activities that ultimately avoid and reduce waste through reuse, repurposing and repair. So many of you will also know that we recently consulted on our next major strategy guiding South Australia's circular economy activity to 2030. So that's the cover there. Our legislation calls for the development of a state waste strategy every 5 years, but for this strategy, we are seeking to accelerate South Australia's transition to a circular economy and not merely meeting those objectives about waste management and resource recovery. So the strategy incorporates circular economy goals, targets and metrics, including an overarching goal to double our circularity rate. And this is an ambitious target, and we know that, but we want to be ambitious with this strategy. And one of these targets is to increase circular consumption activities, and that includes through repair and maintenance, upcycling, refurbishment, sale and purchase of secondhand goods, and leasing, renting, sharing, and also borrowing activities. So this is only one element of our draft strategy, which has 9 focus areas, a series of actions, about 140 odd actions in there. And whilst we're committed to those actions and there's a lot of work to do, we know that there's more work required on setting areas for measurement, establishing baselines and indicators for some of these areas, and this is one of those. So really relevant to draw attention to measuring progress on this slide as well. And whilst consultation on this strategy has actually closed and we're working through submissions, you'll still be able to access it through our website and through the Governance USA website. So if you haven't had a look at it yet, we'd encourage you to do so. And while I've got the mic here, I thought it would be worth mentioning some related activities that we've been undertaking at GESA over the last little while relevant today. So that first sort of document on the screen there is in 2022, we published a report prepared for GESA by Green Around Consulting regarding the opportunities for a circular textile economy in South Australia. In 2023, we undertook a project with Rawtec, again, to investigate the material pathways of uniforms from SA government organisations, and the overview of this report is also available on our website. We've also held 2 collection events targeting textiles in this area, and so last year we had a Give a Sheet for the Planet event where we collected nearly 10 tonnes of household linens for recycling, and we also had the Set Your Clothes Free event this May, where we targeted the donation of high quality clothing and footwear for reuse, as well as household linens for recycling. And that we collected around 20 tonnes of materials through that collection event. And the feedback we received was that the donations were really high quality. So that message around having high quality donations for reuse really came through with that event. So thank you again to our local government, charitable organisation and recycling partners for your contribution to the success of those events. Further to these, Green Industries SA convenes 2 online circular textiles networks. So that's the Stitch and Fit for Purpose networks. And I'm sure many of you here are members of that, and members are welcome. And we also convened a circular textiles roundtable with stakeholders last year, which a number of you would have also attended. So I guess the overarching message of this slide is that, needless to say, we've been active in this space, but acknowledge more is required. Another piece of work that I thought would be worth touching on today, just recognising the interconnectedness between reuse and repair, is in April we published this report looking at the state of the repair and maintenance services sector in South Australia. And this is based on research conducted by Net Zero Lab and funded through Green Industries SA's Circular Economy Market Development Grants program. This study maps the current state of repair and maintenance in South Australia to understand existing barriers and to identify opportunities for growth, including practical ways to support, grow, and build repair and maintenance skills across the state. It covers key areas such as consumption, planned and perceived obsolescence, the role of design, right to repair, community-based initiatives, repair cafes, and also provides context on economics, trades, skills and training, and enablers for increased repair and maintenance services. This report also contains a series of recommended policy options from the authors, many of which are also relevant for what we're talking about today with reuse. So again, lots of references to things that are available on our website. And if you haven't come across these things, we'd recommend you jumping in and having a look. As my light has just gone off, so I must have been sitting too still. So what we're here to talk about today, the South Australian Reuse Impact Study. Fantastic, really excited, really proud for Green Industries SA to have funded this piece of work, aligned to all of the initiatives that I've just mentioned and our overarching objectives. So Lucas and the team at RawTech will talk you through the detail of this study, but I'll just make some introductory remarks, and as I promised, I won't have any spoilers in there. So when I was talking about our strategy before, I mentioned that we need baseline measurements of reuse activities in South Australia, and this is what this study provides and starts that journey. So very importantly, this has been conducted in line with the National Reuse Measurement Guidelines and is similar in scope to activities completed for New South Wales and Tasmania. This study is the most comprehensive measurement of the SA reuse sector to date, providing critical insights to its scale, composition and impact. At Green Industries SA, we're committed to continued measurement and reporting on reuse activity in the state to support our policy and program development. And the ongoing collection of this data will enable targets to be set for our strategies going forward as well. And so we're committed to undertaking these studies annually. We also acknowledge that this first study is a starting point. So it's our intention to expand the scope of future studies to provide a more comprehensive understanding of reuse activities across the state. This full report will be available on the Green Industries SA and Charitable Reuse Australia websites following this webinar. And we'll also distribute some information to draw this more directly to your attention following the webinar. So complementary to this study, Green Industries SA and Charitable Reuse Australia co-hosted a reuse policy workshop in May to identify and discuss potential initiatives to support reuse and repair in SA. Again, I'm sure a number of you were at that event. So the highlights from both the study and the workshop were valuable in informing our understanding of the current state of the reuse sector. And they will also assist refine the proposed actions that we've got in that draft strategy looking at 2025 to 2030. And as I mentioned, has recently undergone consultation and we'll be finalising that for adoption and publication later this year. So I'll probably just finish by saying thank you. At Green Industries SA, we recognise the power of partnerships in seeking to transition to a more circular economy. So you'll see this demonstrated through our draft strategy. We've identified a whole range of different partners through as leads and partners on the implementation of actions. But on this vein of partnerships, I'd like to acknowledge Charitable Reuse Australia as our project partner and RawTech as our research partner, as well as the participating organisation. So I think I'll hand back to you, Omar, to introduce the RawTech team to take us through the detail.
Thank you so much, Josh, for your comments, for all your work and for funding this important study. We really appreciate that. We've enjoyed working with you as well, Han. It's been lovely. I thank you also for mentioning the reuse policy workshop, because it's great to have this data, but the most important thing is how is it used, because that's the critical point of it. It provides an evidence base for future interventions. That's why we've titled this webinar Unlocking the Insights. It's like, how do we use this one? How do we move it forward? How do we accelerate reuse in South Australia? How do we support charity? How do we support council? So it's a very exciting time. Just a couple of things very quickly. The New South Wales and the Tassie ones, which Josh mentioned preceded this study, they gained some amazing insights into the differences between the two. And I think we were also quite, surprised about what it was. Now we have South Australia, we have 3 state governments where we can share differences and, where we're doing well, where we're not doing well. I think that provides a real great context. Most importantly, let's use the data to move it forward. Both New South Wales and Tassie have actually implemented some real practical initiatives to move it forward. So we're looking forward to working with Josh, you and your team to do the same here in South Australia once we digest this data. Now, in terms of the data, let's get to it. We've kept you on tender hooks for all this time. Kat Heinrich, RawTech, we love working with you. When we first envisaged this project, and I was talking to Monash University, because they're the ones that created the National Reuse Measurement Guidelines, I said, who is the best person to be able to actually deliver this, maintain the guidelines, and they went Kat Heinrich. So you've been a fantastic partner, you and your whole team. Lucas and Meg, brilliant in terms of your attention to detail, upholding the guidelines, being robust, being representative, and methodologically perfect. So what can I say? Kat Heinrich, over to you for the good stuff.
All right, thank you for the very kind, warm welcome, Omar. And thank you very much, Josh, as well for your background, and to Han and the team, and of course, my team, Lucas and Meg, who you'll hear from shortly. So we're giving a bit of a presentation today, which will go for about 20 minutes before we head back to Salma to talk about the Q&A and go through that. But it's my absolute pleasure to be able to talk about what are the impacts of reuse activity across South Australia. And in my opinion, the reuse sector is the quiet achiever in South Australia and really across the country. It happens every day that we're reusing materials, be that taking a bag of clothing to the op shop or buying secondhand furniture. But until now, we really haven't had a clear picture of the scale of that reuse activity in South Australia. And that's what this study is about. It's about unpacking what is that impact from an environmental perspective, a social perspective as well. So each year, there's a huge amount of reuse activity that happens across South Australia. If I could just go to the next slide there, Lucas. So we estimate that South Australians are giving a second life to 34.8 million items each year. Behind those numbers, that headline numbers, is countless number of toys, furniture, clothing, etc. So many items, 34.8 million items. And reuse is not just about those numbers, it's about the benefits that they provide. And you know, if we think about the cost of living savings, which is so important right now, given we're in a cost of living crisis, the huge benefits to South Australia is estimated about $230 million of cost of living savings. And that's from people being able to buy secondhand instead of buying new. And at the same time, reuse provides jobs and training. On a per tonne basis, we estimate that reuse creates 21 times more jobs, paid jobs that is, than recycling on a per tonne basis. So when we're talking about transitioning from a linear to a circular economy, it's obviously important that we have jobs to support that transition, and reuse is a really important and key sector, and certainly punches above its weight compared to recycling. And lastly, the environmental story is just as powerful. Through reuse, South Australians are preventing 130,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions each year. Now, to put that into perspective, that's equivalent to taking 51,000 cars off the road. So the message is clear. Reuse is not a niche activity. It's a vibrant, community-driven part of our economy that delivers these triple bottom line benefits for the economy, the social aspects, and the environment too. So with that view now, I'd like to hand over to my team members, Lucas de Garis and Meg Ellis, who will unpack these findings in a lot more detail. They'll take you through the methodology, the market landscape, and the full set of impacts that we've measured. So over to you, Lucas.
Thanks, Kat. Appreciate your introduction. And just to give introduction from me, I'm Lucas de Garis. I'm a consultant at Rawtec, and we've worked with Charitable Reuse Australia and Green Industries SA on this project, measuring the impacts and the activity of reuse in South Australia. Do you just want to close the door? Sorry. Before we jump into the key data findings for everybody here, I thought I might just take you through the background around the study and the methodology used for this project. This project is grounded in a robust methodology outlined by the National Reuse Measurement Guidelines, produced by Monash University and updated in consultation with Rawtec after the first use of it in New South Wales. This is the third time, as he previously alluded, these guidelines have been put to use following New South Wales study and a study earlier this year in Tasmania. All three of these studies use the same guidelines and methodology to quantify the reuse and its impacts within those states. And also those triple bottom line impacts. So that triple bottom line includes economic, social and environmental impacts or benefits of reuse in those states. So how do we get here? Over the past 6 months, we developed a survey based on those Monash guidelines, asking for data from reuse organisations on a number of things, such as number of items sold, donated, exported, number of employees, training provided, reinvestment back into the community, just to name a few things. We sent the survey out to over 200 identified reuse organisations, receiving 39 organisation responses. And then we pulled that data together into different metrics, such as items sold per site, staff per tonne, and then proportion of revenue reinvested back into the community, and then extrapolate those numbers for the whole SA reuse picture. This project defines reuse somewhat differently, to how other organisations in the general public may see reuse. Reuse was defined as the reallocation of items or materials to a new owner or purpose without reprocessing or remanufacture, but potentially with some repair. And that's how this connects with those repair studies that have been occurring in the background of Green Industries SA as well. For example, reuse in this project includes selling second-hand items. It also includes giving or donating second-hand items for free to those who require welfare recipients. And then also it includes exporting second-hand items for reuse in other countries. Aspects of reuse or recycling that aren't covered by this definition include items that are sent overseas but aren't reused, so those that are downcycled into rags or burnt for energy or landfilled, those aren't included in the numbers we'll present today. Renting or loaning second-hand items also weren't included in the scope of this study, and neither were pre-consumer items. We were only considering post-consumer items, so not including excess stock that was provided as donations to reuse organisations. And we also weren't considering recycling for material value. Rather, we're looking only at keeping the materials at their highest and best use in being reused as items. In terms of the types of organisations we surveyed for this data, this presentation today includes a large proportion of the bricks and mortar stores within South Australia, including charities, not-for-profits, commercials, rent-a-racks, consignment stores, tip shops and exporters. We chose these organisations to align with those previous studies as well. We understand also that online reuse is an important part of today's reuse economy. However, with only publicly available data we were able to use, this was separately reported. There are also pawn shops, auction houses and informal reuse such as hand-me-downs and clothing swaps that we identify as part of the reuse economy, but we didn't receive any data on. And although these are not included in the scope of this project, we recognise that they play a large part in the SA context. So from the 39 organisations that we received data from, they provided data for over 140 local reuse sites. In addition, we received a majority of data from exporters for reuse in South Australia. Just to further the scope, there are different items that we counted in reuse. We got a breakdown of items across 27 subcategories that were rolled up into 3 main categories. Those 3 categories were clothing and textiles, household homewares, toys and games, and building and hardware. In the clothing and textiles category, it not only includes classic op-shop items like clothing and footwear, but also textiles like carpets, but also handbags and suitcases. For the household homewares, toys and games category, this is a large category that covers a lot of day-to-day items, such as large items like furniture and white goods, but also small items like handheld electronics, glassware, plates, crockery, books, magazines, etc. The third and final large category that we looked at was building and hardware, and this was looking at more material reuse, so timber, plastic, rubber, metal products, but also outdoor tools, hardware and machinery are included in this category. This study ultimately covers a lot of the South Australian reuse sector, and with a robust methodology gives great basis to quantify for the first time South Australia's reuse activity and then its impacts. With the triple bottom line impacts for reuse in SA, we also completed a desktop analysis of the reuse organisations that make up the general structure of the SA reuse market. And this is key to understanding how South Australians participate and can participate in reuse in future years. And therefore, where government and industry can potentially focus efforts and build on the great sector that is already established in South Australia. In terms of the total volumes of reuse, reuse shops play a critical role in keeping valuable items in circulation. Across the state, each South Australian provides 19 items for reuse each year. That's what we found from this study for 23-24 data. And when you multiply that out for 23-24, we found that just under 35 million items are reused in the South Australian context, or around 16,000 tonnes of items. The majority of these by weight stay within South Australia's economy, with 11,000 items being resold by reuse organisations back to the public, and a further 100 tonnes being donated by those organisations to people in tough times. The other 5,000 tonnes on top of that or 31%, are exported to other countries for reuse. not for recycling, not for landfilling, but for reuse. Compared to other jurisdictions, SA has good access to an export market, but we don't rely on it. Of the items reused locally, SA has a higher proportion that are sold compared to donated. This indicates that there's commercial reuse shops such as Rent-A-Racks and larger organisations which rarely donate items have a strong presence within the South Australian context. For these reuse shops that facilitate this reuse, we identified 427 reuse shops across the state, or around 23 shops per 100,000 people. Across SA, different types of reuse shops are also available to residents, including a growing commercial presence, as discussed before, consignment shops, Rent-A-Racks, and a small number of tip shops. But charitable and not-for-profit reuse shops still play a huge part in the SA reuse market, with 85% of shops that we identified. That 85% equals to around 361 shops, or 19.2 shops per 100,000 people. There are also 8 tip shops that we identified across South Australia, 23 consignment / Rent-A-Racks, and 35 commercial reuse shops. And we should be proud of this sector, especially since South Australia was the home of the first Rent-A-Rack model for a reuse shop in Australia. The organisations also play a role in terms of how many options or reuse shops they actually operate within the South Australian context. We split these down into 3 different sizes: large organisations that operate 7 or more op shops or reuse shops in South Australia, medium organisations that operate 2 to 6 shops each, and small organisations which are single shop operators. Large organisations play an important role in South Australia, with 31% of the shops that we identified, or 133 shops, being from those organisations. These are mostly national players with a presence in multiple states as well as South Australia. Medium-sized organisations made up 11%, or 47 shops, and tend to only be in SA, operating in SA, and have grown through community support of their operations. But the majority of shops in South Australia, reuse shops in South Australia that we identified, are the single shop operators, 58%, or 247 shops across South Australia. This high level of look at South Australia's market share across different sized organisations shows that when we compare with other jurisdictions, SA has a large presence of those small organisations. This can be attributed to the presence of community-run shops that are often attached to local churches or local parishes, tying in with Adelaide particularly being known as the city of churches and having a large per capita assortment of churches there. In terms of market insights from this investigation and coupled with further consultations with industry, we can find that SA has a strong presence in some areas of the reuse market, such as small church-affiliated op shops, Rent-A-Racks, and also large commercial second-hand shops. But South Australia is underrepresented in tip shops compared to other states. We also understand that South Australia does well compared to other states to reuse and keep items local rather than exporting for reuse overseas. And overall, South Australia has a unique, community-driven and innovative market that is well supported across a variety of organisation sizes and types. That covers the key market findings that we found for South Australia. I'll hand over to my colleague Meg to take you through the triple bottom line impacts of this report.
Thank you, Lucas. So now that we've had a bit of an introduction to the study, we've also had some insights into the South Australian market and some insights into the scale of reuse. I'd now like to talk through some of the key triple bottom line impacts. So I'll start by talking about the economic value. In total, secondhand items sold or donated generated a value of around $112.5 million. And when we look locally, we can see that the 17 million items resold in SA generated an economic value of $106 million. And now this table provides a further breakdown where we can see items valued at $1.5 million were donated to welfare recipients, and the rest of the value is generated from exporting overseas for reuse. So in other words, it's the items that are reused locally that create the greatest value. As Kat mentioned earlier, reuse generates 21 times more jobs than recycling on a per tonne basis. And then when we look at landfill, this number jumps to 69 times. This clearly shows that the reuse industry is a key driver of job creation and employment opportunities as we move towards a circular economy. So we know now that reuse on a per tonne basis generates more jobs than recycling and landfill, but let's look at total employment. So our study found that the reuse industry provides 505 full-time equivalent roles, and this includes 188 full-time equivalents for those facing barriers to employment. And barriers to employment can include long-term unemployment, a refugee background, a disability, and more. So on top of that paid employment, we also found that the reuse industry generates over 1,000 full-time equivalent volunteer roles. So that means that 68% of the industry's hours is actually completed by volunteers, indicating that the South Australian market relies strongly on community support. So on top of these roles, the industry also provides more than 40,000 hours of training and skill development to their volunteers and paid staff. So this shows that not only does the reuse industry create jobs, but it's also a driver for social inclusion and skill development. Not only does the reuse sector boost the economy and create jobs, it also delivers strong social impacts. We found that reuse organisations help to relieve cost of living pressures for South Australians by $231 million each year. And this is around $300 in savings per household. And beyond these consumer savings, reuse organisations reinvested over $14 million into social and community programs. And this includes support for people experiencing homelessness, people with a disability, emergency relief, and more. So reuse eases financial pressures and it strengthens community wellbeing. Our survey also set out to capture data on items repaired before being reused. We found that only 3% of reused items are repaired, a majority of that occurs overseas. Local repair is partly constrained by labour costs that tend to outweigh the resale return. Building on these social and economic impacts we've seen, let's discuss the environmental impacts. The direct environmental impacts are clear. We can see that through reuse organisations, 16,000 tonnes of items are diverted from landfill. And through this diversion, fewer new products are consumed and therefore produced, which results in saving of around 130,000 tonnes of carbon emissions, which, like Kat mentioned, is around 51,000 cars being taken off the road. We saw water savings of 5,400 megalitres, which is equivalent to 2,200 Olympic-sized swimming pools. We saw land use savings of around 49,000 hectares, which is the equivalent of 68,000 soccer pitches. And together, these outcomes highlight just how powerful reuse is in reducing our environmental impact. So we've talked about the economic, social and environmental impacts of reuse, but beyond what's measurable, the reuse sector provides the community with a range of intangible benefits. So our study found that reuse strengthens social bonds, builds confidence and provides a sense of purpose. And I've seen this firsthand from volunteering myself at an op shop. And as an avid thrifter, I can contest that reuse provides a sense of environmental responsibility, provides pride in giving items a second life, and provides a practical way to fight against the impacts of fast fashion. And that's an overview of the quantifiable triple bottom line impacts, as well as some of the intangible benefits that the reuse industry provides. And I'd now like to pass back to Kat for close.
Thank you so much, Meg and Lucas. You've both done a wonderful job on this study, so thank you for your work. So yeah, before we wrap up, I just want to say on behalf of RawTech, and I know certainly Josh and Oma have acknowledged this previously, just a big thank you to all the organisations who provided data for this survey and for this study, because without it, we wouldn't be able to derive these insights. And I hope for people on the call today, the takeaway that you have in your mind is a couple of things. Number one, reuse is already contributing so much to our economy. It's huge environmental benefits, economic benefits, and social benefits, as Meg has just unpacked for you there. But not only is it already significant, it's also the potential, and that goes back to a point that Oma made earlier in terms of what can we do? How can we further build and strengthen the South Australia's reuse activity? Because we cannot recycle our way to a circular economy. We really need to increase the amount of reuse, and we can see that reuse punches above its weight in terms of the benefits to society and environment. A ton of reuse far outweighs a ton of recycling. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do recycling. It absolutely has its place and needs to be done, but I would love to see just as much investment in reuse as there is in recycling. So thank you again, Meg and Lucas, for unpacking those findings, and thank you, Josh, Oma, and Han, for your support in this incredible study. Back to you, Oma.
Thanks, Kat. Thanks, Kat. All right. Now onto the really interesting bit. We would love your questions. I'm going to pass on to my wonderful colleague Salma Garaba, who's just such a good facilitator. I can see we've got the odd question in the comments. Can you pop them in the Q&A just so that we can just look in the one spot? That would be lovely. Salma, we haven't got any. We need to spruik some questions. Come on. Salma, before I pass on to you, I've got one here from Gemma Chambers. It's in the chat. It says, does GESA have a plan to use these findings as a CE/reuse community engagement program?
Yep. So happy to jump in there. I mean, you're doing well to wrangle things there. Yes, in terms of a range of actions, no, like not specifically in terms of a yes directly to that question, but we've got a whole range of actions. I think there might be a couple of other questions in there that are related to this, yeah. Oma, in terms of what are the next steps in this space? How can we take this work and use it to influence action, and really redrive these areas of the circular economy? So the easiest answer for me to give on this is to have a look at our draft strategy. That this work helped inform where we went with that for the draft strategy, and that's being finalised, and we'll adopt that and publish it later this year. But there are a whole range of actions outlined in that draft strategy that relate to waste avoidance, and so that links in with the design elements that we've heard mentioned today that link in really well here, as well as addressing emerging and problematic waste streams. So textiles is identified there as a really key area that's relevant to what we're talking about today. And also developing circular economy knowledge and skills, which I touched on in my opening remarks. So there's a whole range of actions. There's a bunch in our draft strategy. There's more that we can do. And in terms of developing up a specific program, that's something that we could look at. And the way we'll be implementing our strategy over the next 5 years is going through business planning processes. So each year we'll be going through a process of determining what programs are being targeted for certain areas, and which of those programs also have funding elements to them for people to apply for grant funding and those things too.
Lovely. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Salma. I'm doing too much talking. Over to you. I think there's a few more in the chat here, so I'll leave it with you.
Thanks, Omar. I think we have a question from, I think that answers Martin's questions about next steps. So I hope that answered your question, Martin. We have a question from Shani Wood. Fantastic work for everyone involved. Are there any examples of new programs, initiatives that New South Wales and Tasmania have implemented that could be looked at here in SA? Do we have any understandings as to why tip shops are underrepresented in SA?
Well, let me kind of start on that one. I know we've got a couple of colleagues from the New South Wales EPA on the call today, so maybe I shouldn't speak on their behalf, but if you want to jump in, I think Antoinette and Bronwyn, I think you're there. From our side, we were absolutely delighted to collaborate with the EPA, and one of their initiatives was a reuse and repair strategy, the announcement of that one. So we're very pleased to be part of that one. I think that's really, really an important step, and we're continuing to support the New South Wales EPA. Another one that came out from New South Wales EPA was their vision for a reuse impact calculator, and that is an absolutely brilliant tool. It can help councils. But basically, you just it's got all of this data, but it's actually in a resource. So if a council wants to work out its impact, it can easily do so. If you want to have a clothing collection day, if you have a target amount of tons or items, you can plonk that into the calculator and it will give you your triple bottom line impact. Reuse organisations can use it to encourage more donations, and in fact some councils in New South Wales are also using it to promote their sustainability impact, also to get some residents not focusing on rates and other things, and try to shift the dynamic there. So we'd love GISA to consider funding a calculator for that. That will be a really wonderful resource. In Tassie, yeah, a couple of things. One of the, I'm not sure if we've got any colleagues from Tassie on the call today. One of the areas that was quite interesting in Tassie was just how small some of the organisations are and how labour intensive and how reliant they are on volunteers. We kind of knew that before, but we didn't realise the extent of it. So I know that they are looking to support those smaller organisations in a more robust manner. It probably not correct of me to share any details before they're announced by them, but certainly that's happened. And again, I think Tassie are looking very strongly at reuse and repair. I have forgotten the second half of the question, Salma, but I know it wasn't for me. Can you remind me what that was? And then we'll find the appropriate person.
And understand why tip shops are underrepresented in SA.
This looks like a Kat Lucas Meg question, huh?
I'm happy to provide some sort of commentary on this. I think it's a really good question in terms of why South Australia has fewer tip shops per 100,000 people, but also represented in terms of reuse organisations across South Australia. We think we didn't quantify or capture data from salvage shops in this study, or like sort of furniture repair shops and those sort of larger items. We feel might go to those sort of shops in South Australia, and South Australia might have more of a presence of those. The other reasoning behind it is we saw that South Australia generally has more of a centralised population compared to New South Wales and Tasmania, and it seems that the tip shops seem to be more populous in New South Wales and Tasmania in those rural areas where sort of op shops aren't able to take more larger items and things like that. So the infrastructure seems to be more of a regional infrastructure, and we can definitely see that in the 8 tip shops that we identified across South Australia are all mostly regional or on the outskirts of Greater Adelaide. So yeah, that might be answering some of that question there in terms of why tip shops aren't as large a part of the South Australian market.
Just to add to that, yeah, that's right, Lucas. And just to add to that, it also signals a bit of an opportunity for South Australia. We do have tip shops, but through our work that we've been doing with Green Industries SA, so that Josh mentioned earlier, and some work we're doing on the infrastructure planning, it's clear that there is opportunity to have more tip shops and or to enhance them, and also to build around some aspects of a circular hub as well. So to make it easier, like a one-stop shop for residents to participate in the circular economy, so that when they go to their local transfer station, it's not just a place that they can dump products or recycle products, but it's a place they can buy secondhand, that they can repair, that they can get compost, that they can do food swaps, and the whole all the aspects of the circular economy. So Green Industries SA and Rawtech developed a circular hub guide for South Australia, and I think it's clear that there is opportunity to expand the existing activities that councils do across those transfer stations and across those tip shops to make it more convenient than ever for people, for residents to participate in the circular economy, to lower those barriers.
And if I could just jump in there, Omer, as well, to build on that one of the things that we've looked at is how do we expand some of those programs that were our existing programs, not necessarily waiting for our strategy to be finalised, that we've identified this shift from just waste and resource recovery activity into the circular economy. So our recycling infrastructure grants have now been sort of shifted into circular infrastructure grants, so that the eligible activities has been expanded a bit there. And I think they're just picking on a couple of questions, and probably that earlier question around engagement activity. I think there's a couple of questions there about how we can share the learnings from this study. So I know that you, Omar, and colleagues at Charitable Reuse Australia will be doing all you can to get the message out there on this, and we'll be doing the same. I think there's a question in there about how can we distill some of this information to get some of those key messages across as well. And so I think that's an opportunity that would be both looking at to potentially use opportunities to grab those key bits of information, use it as infographics or whatever way we can communicate that to share the message far and wide. And without taking your job, Sam, I think there's a question there about how do we see information from other states, and those reuse studies from other states are publicly available, aren't they, Omar? So.
No, cool. Josh, it's great. I think Salma's got you and I as our EA. It's good, yeah. So we're both supporting you.
You're doing an excellent job. I think Luke had that question, which Josh just mentioned. Is it possible to receive information from other states in a comparison form so they can kind of see how the reuse activity is in comparison measured in the different states that underwent the study?
Do you want me to start just top line, Kat, and then I'll defer to you and maybe Lucas? Okay, so we did. We have now those 3 state studies. We've already put on our website the very, very top line ones for New South Wales and Tassie. I think we have to be careful about comparing with apples because there's context there. But I think with RoarTech, we chose, I think, 10 or so key metrics. It is on our website. Once this webinar is complete, we'll also include South Australia. We've also taken through RoarTech, we've had a stab at a national projection. I think Lucas worked on kind of a lower projection, a higher projection. We've taken sort of a midpoint, but we don't really know exactly what's happening in Queensland, Victoria and WA. So it's hard to project given that states are different. But we've got the top line ones, which will be a very snapshot comparison. For more detailed analysis, I always defer to Kat because we've got to make sure we're robust on that. So can I pass to you for any other further thoughts on comparing, whether that's through the data or through insights or whichever way you wish.
Yeah, no, I think that resource, Omar, that you talked about is the key one. So there is a table in there that compares the different states and the different levels of the metrics in terms of employment per 10,000 tonnes, etc. That is a really good source of information. But yes, again, being cautious that we're comparing fairly, which is part of the reason as well that in this study we tried to stick as closely as possible to the same scope of reuse activity. So in that table that Lucas presented in one of his slides, it showed what we measured and what wasn't in scope. So we tried as closely as possible to keep that scope consistent across the 3 states. And I do note there was another question about what about the other activity. Well, some of it is quite informal activity, and that's another key point with this study is we kept true to the Monash guidelines, and the way that data was collected and measured was through point of sale data. So it's not through Weybridge data, it's not through anything like that, it's point of sales data. So we could actually we are certain a sale was made that's secondhand, and that's why we haven't gone down the pathway of doing informal reuse activity. Not saying it's not important, but for this study, trying to make sure we're confident in the numbers that we have. So yeah, that's hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Kat. I'm just trying to also pop into the chat because I know that there's some questions there. So Ella Vangula is asking, did your research also include questions around barriers and operations for the reuse industry?
Yeah, no, we absolutely did. And we found that, the barriers or the challenges, there's quite a few, and they're quite common across the states and territories. So number one, volunteer shortages and limitations. And we heard that in the presentation it showed from Meg when she said a lot of the hours come from volunteer time, and the volunteers, that volunteer pool, the availability is shrinking over time. We've seen a volunteer shortage arise. So that is a very common challenge. Also, the donation and the stock quality. So many items that are donated for reuse, many of them are outright waste. So they're not suitable for reuse. And that's partly due to the influence of fast fashion. We've seen lower and lower quality items being sold in Australia and ultimately being donated in Australia. There's also all sorts of challenges with vandalism and theft, especially outside of hours, financial constraints, so making it difficult for these organisations to operate, and it's increasingly tight. You've got these cost of living pressures for households, but actually there's cost of living pressures or cost of doing business pressures, and that's not just the private sector, that's the charitable sector too. So you've got increased energy costs, you've got rent cost, and they also have to pay a proportion of the waste levy in South Australia. So they've got that additional cost in South Australia too. So they're under a lot of cost pressures. So that's something that they're struggling with, as well as spatial constraints. And when it comes to some of the opportunities for organisations, reuse organisations in South Australia, it's kind of linked to the barriers in terms of having some of that financial support, as well as the education and public engagement. It is so important that people understand what is a suitable donation, and that they engage. And actually, there's so much textile waste still going to landfill. So much could be recovered. So there's a huge opportunity in that space too, which links into one of the earlier questions as well. So those are some of the key ones that came out of the consultations. Omer, do you want to add to that as well, based on your lens?
I think you've pretty much covered it, Kat. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kat. We have a question from Alison Rouge around, do we know which countries the textiles sent overseas for reuse are sent to? And I understand this was outside of the scope of the study, but was there any information regarding what SA sends overseas for landfilling or incineration?
Yeah, okay.
Omar, you want to take that?
Grab that one. Yeah, thanks, Selma. Okay, so we know from the exporters, and also Charitable Reuse Australia has an export accreditation scheme for clothing. We know from that the main hubs for overseas exports for reuse are Kuala Lumpur and also UAE. From there, it goes to multiple destinations, but generally speaking, if you look at geography, most of our stuff will go to the Pacific Islands and East Africa. So markets like Ghana are more served by the US and Europe. I mean, geographically, it makes more sense. So that's the mix. In terms of information of exports sent overseas, we audited the export organizer. This is not specific for South Australia. This is national. We know that about 5 to 6% waste gets into that stream, contaminates it, not purposefully, but accidentally. So our sector certainly does not send items on purpose for landfilling or incineration. There's about 5% that gets contaminated. We know that 76% of the items sent overseas are reused. There's also an element of upcycling and etc., which is part and parcel of that. Now, these figures will be audited in our next round of the clothing reuse export accreditation scheme. We've got overseas auditors which will assess that data and verify it by the contracts sold to overseas buyers. So come 2026, we will be the first country in the world to have audited data on the actual percentage of items reused, recycled / upcycled, and waste. So, but essentially, fundamentally it's a good trade. There are some challenges with it, but I think just from a commercial basis, the exporters have to have at least 60-70% reuse, otherwise they don't make any money. So, but anyway, look out for the next export accreditation scheme update coming to you shortly.
Thanks, Omar. We have a question from Hannah Richards. She's asking, how much is it costing the charitable op-shop sector to dispose of poor quality donated items? Who wants to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take it as well. Okay. Now, This study didn't measure that one. We did some stuff a couple of years ago, and look, this is for far. No wonder was that 6 years ago. Look, it's around $18 million. That's just the disposal cost. However, from our comms, we don't like to focus on the waste costs, the disposal costs, or the dumping that happens, because what we found is if that gets into the media, it undermines trust in networks. So every time there's a dumping story, people watching go, oh my gosh, the charities are overloaded. Oh, I won't give my stuff to, Vinnie's or Salvos or Red Cross or Save It. No. Please give it to us. Maybe don't give it to us all on Boxing Day, but we want it. So there's kind of sort of a bit of a mix in terms of upholding trust in the network. But yes, it is a large cost. But on the other hand, we know that it's 14% from that previous study. So if you think about it from that context, we're using 86% of what we receive. That's an older study. So it's a very effective and efficient network. So the more effective it is, the more support we get, the better we can do. I think what we'd be calling for really is just more support for charities from governments to encourage donations, from consumers, because there is that misunderstanding, encouragement from governments to accelerate collection networks. And also, we've been talking with quite a few state governments about changing the way that grants happen. Pretty much a lot of the grant structures of governments are around big infrastructure projects, recycling, new business, and that's fine. But what about the top of the waste hierarchy? So our call to government is also, look, if you give us a bit of space, if you give us some more people or encourage us to have a bit more space, we can actually reuse much more. We've got 150 years worth of expertise. We now have data in SA about the triple bottom line impact. It's not hard. It may not be fancy and glamorous, but the sector does a brilliant job. All we need is just a little bit of help to move it forward, and we can scale that much more effectively. So yeah, so complex. We always try to err on the positive and what can be done rather than the sensationalist stuff.
I can jump in there as well. I think, why not be fancy and glamorous like that? Celebrate it. And we've had some good engagement with yourself, but also other Charitable Reuse Australia members, including Martin, around what that could look like for South Australia, and committed to a piece of work around what some of those support mechanisms could look like. So more to come on that. And that, I think, part of this just draws back to that engagement piece as well around behaviour change more broadly for circular economy. But in this area, how do we make sure that those donations, all don't come at the same time on Boxing Day, but also of high quality? And we experienced that through our Set Your Clothes Free event, where that message around high quality donations was heard loud and clear, because the overwhelming majority of what was donated through that event was suitable for reuse and had great impact. So yeah, just adding to that.
Thank you, Josh. Do we have time for more questions?
Oh my gosh, it's been an hour. Huh? Wow.
We have 1 minute left. So
you're the boss, Salma. Go on, 1 minute left.
Okay, one last question. Maria Madison asked, I'm curious, has there been any investigation into differences in reuse activity between urban and rural areas in SA? I'm particularly interested in which type of reuse market are most popular, such as online marketplaces, garage sales. I believe that understanding could significantly guide investment and enhance reuse efforts across the state.
Kat Heinrich, yeah.
No, I was just going to say that particular question was outside of scope of this study, so it's another level of detail. I would be interested in the insights. But as Lucas touched on earlier, there is a lot of tip shops in the regional parts of South Australia. So I imagine there's more activity happening in that space compared to Metro. But we don't have the detailed insights yet. But it would be an interesting study to dig a bit deeper and understand those regional differences.
Yeah. No, it is on the hour, so we can stay a little bit longer if you wish, but for those of you who have other meetings, just from my side, thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you so much for all you do for reuse in South Australia and nationally. We look forward to continuing to work with you. So I might hand over to Josh just to say goodbye to any participants who want to leave, but I'm happy to stay on for another 5-10 minutes. I don't know, Kat, are you and your team free? Josh, your call, but maybe over to you. Okay.
I do have something else to get to, but can hang around for a little bit longer. But just in terms of closing remarks, just wanted to just reiterate some of those earlier remarks around thanks everyone for taking the time to come to today's webinar. It's been a fantastic turnout for the release of the study, and it gives us some fantastic insights, and probably picking up on that last question and some of what I raised in my introductory remarks around this being the first study, right? And we've got lots of areas we can build on and expand on going forward. And so all of those comments and suggestions are welcome. But yeah, no, thanks everyone. Thanks Charitable Reuse Australia and RawTech for your partnership on this, all of the organisations that contributed and made it what it is. And yeah, for everyone to take the time to be here today.
Yeah, and thank you also, Josh. It's great that the CEO is here in person, which is, I think, a wonderful affirmation of your support and your interest in this one. So thank you very much also to you personally, as well as organisationally. We can do a few more questions. Han, do you want to say something, Han? You've been so involved in this project. Come on. Huh?
I just want to say, a really big thank you to our project partners, as well as the charitable or reuse organization that contributed to the study. As Kat mentioned, it wouldn't be possible without your support and contribution. But in terms of opportunity, through our conversation, one of the big area is, just communicating that impact of reuse, so that people are more aware of it, because people are aware of the, the social impact of the reuse sector, but sometimes just the environmental impact has been overlooked. And I've seen one of the question in the comments saying, which key points should be used to communicate to the stakeholders or any relevant parties. There are just so much good insights in this study, and I think depending on your purpose or what you need to do, there's just so much that you can pick and choose to see how it can, help with your purpose. But just want to say, if there's any further question, feel free to send through an email, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Han. Well, we don't have any other questions. A lot of thank yous, a lot of great presentations. So the feedback is excellent, but no other questions are sent through either on the chat or the Q&A. So I guess we can conclude today's webinar. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
It's a wrap. All right. Thank you.
Great job. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.